Hello, everyone. On behalf of AAEE Board Member and Director of Professional Development, Alicia Scott, it's my pleasure to welcome you to another webinar hosted by the American Association for Employment and Education. Thank you for joining us for today's topic, ESSER Fund Insights from Those in the Know. My name is Tim Newbert, and I serve as AAEE's Executive Director. Please allow me to cover just a few housekeeping matters before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to AAEE members as well as non-members who registered for the event. Attendees are encouraged to post any questions, comments, or feedback using the Q&A or chat features within Zoom. If you or your organization do not yet have AAEE membership, please visit our website, aaee.org, to learn more about our activities and resources. We are a professional association intent on positively impacting education through professional connections. Related to that mission, we connect the three critical groups involved with the preparation, recruitment, and retention of pre-K-12 educators, university professionals and others who prepare and support educators, school system professionals and others who recruit, hire, and retain them, and of course, educator candidates themselves. We offer annual publications such as the Job Search Handbook for Educators. We conduct an educator supply and demand survey each fall and winter, resulting in a spring report. In fact, our 2022-2023 report was just released last week. We co-host the Careers for Educators job.com job board with Kappa Delta Pi. We host webinars such as this one on topics relevant to our membership. With support from Proximity Learning and Bench K-12 respectively, we sponsor scholarships for future teachers and mini grants for school systems and nonprofits to encourage and support educator pipelines. In collaboration with Upbeat, we co-host an annual national working group on teacher retention, and we host an annual conference and education career expo each fall. Our 2023 event will be held on October 23rd to 26th in Chicago, Illinois. Check out our website to learn more. Thank you again for joining us for today's panel presentation and conversation about ESSER funds with experts on the topic. We're pleased to be joined today by Kimberly Glass, Federal Programs Director at Springdale Public Schools in Arkansas, Dr. Layla Newland, Senior Managing Director, K-12 Research and Professional Services at Hanover Research, and Tanya Smith, Director, Office of Emergency Programs at South Carolina Department of Education. Thank you all for being here today. Let us begin. So I'm going to begin, as all of my panelists are aware, we posed some questions to them in advance of this webinar. And so we're going to begin with the very first question. I can bring it up here. What are some creative design models that can be implemented with ESSER funds to reimagine education? And Kimberly, we're going to start with you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for having us. So we've done several things with ESSER funds as we obviously moved into COVID. And so we had a School of Innovation that was a 6-12 school, and we converted that to a K-12 school so that we would have virtual school offerings at the time for our parents. And that is one of the things that we've continued to have. And hopefully we plan to continue to offer that. It's been a great success for our parents and families. I'm communication. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, we've got a communications person here that likes to document things for our district. So we'll continue with that. And then we've also really tried to address learning loss. We've hired academic support interventionists, so all of our schools have those available to them, and they're working with the students daily. We've had summer school and focused on academics that tried to make that where that it was not just your regular summer school, but had enrichment opportunities as well. And we've also taken a focus on professional learning communities and done a lot of professional development training, attended conferences, and brought folks in district for that training. And as a result of that, this past year, we actually had a school board vote to change our school schedule so that Wednesdays we are letting out early and have time to focus on those professional learning communities, and our teachers are able to meet for 80 minutes once a week, and so that all of our faculty is able to be in a team and be able to work together and really focus on the work at hand. And so that's something that we'll be able to continue to do as we move forward. I have talked with some colleagues that have also been able to implement some smart labs where that students are able to have hands-on experience with science labs, and that's something that they felt has been very successful for them.
So just
Thank you, Kimberly.
extending some of your ideas, Kimberly, in our work. So at Hanover, for those who don't know us, we work with just over 300 public school districts and 12 state departments of education, and we're a research and evaluation team. So when I think about and reflect over the past few years and where we're seeing funding go and potentially creative models, a few examples come to mind. So one, we saw in the state of Connecticut in our partnership with the Connecticut State Department of Education, they launched a learner engagement and attendance program. So they called it LEAP. And that was focused on chronic absenteeism, in case you couldn't figure it out from the title. And really one of the things that they focused on that I wanted to elevate, because we've seen this as a consistent practice come up in our COVID and post-COVID world, are home visits. So really looking to connect home visitors directly with families and students for that relationship building. I think that when I look at some of the programming and investments that we've seen at the state level, but individual district level, really thinking through that relationship and that sense of connectedness. And so this program in Connecticut, they were really trying to drive more regular attendance, and it makes sense, right? Rather than trying to drive it from the districts, going out into communities, having those home visits to better understand what were the barriers, but not just for the traditional school day, but also summer and after school programming. So even though we haven't seen a ton of new ESSER dollars invested in summer school programming, one of the things about the Connecticut program that stood out to me was that focus on enrollment. Pre-COVID and in this current era, that's a challenge, right? We stand up our summer school programming, but how do we make sure that our families know that it's available to them? How do we make sure that we're structuring it in a way where the kids can be there, right? Because we can sit in a room together and list all of the different reasons why our kiddos might struggle to sign up for summer school programming. So it was really that intentional relationship building that I thought would be worth this discussion, because as we're going to talk about in a few moments, we're going to talk about how these funds are going to go away, right? And when I think about what I worry about most is that emphasis on well-being and the relationships and the connectedness, right? Because if we're not okay, we know this, we don't bring our best selves to our work, and our kids can't bring their best selves to their learning. And so what I thought was really neat about the LEAP program, and they did an evaluation, which we'll talk about more in a few minutes as well, but some of the things that they saw, an 8 percentage point increase in attendance K-5, which was really fantastic, right? Understanding that we also saw a 16% point increase in secondary student attendance, which was really phenomenal when we think about all of the barriers and challenges when we start talking about chronic absenteeism among our secondary students. And understanding that the visits at home mattered most. So this relationship and the liaison while meeting with students in the school building and calling parents and family members into the school building, when they were doing an evaluation of the program, going out into the homes really made a significant impact on attendance. And I know my colleagues on the panel are nodding their heads. So this isn't shocking, but I think when we have data like this, it's really helpful to elevate the different programming. And then the other piece, Tanya, because I'm sure you have more to share, that I would highlight are the data collection and monitoring efforts that we see. So in partnering with New Mexico Public Education Department, seeing that they really wanted to invest in academic coaches and outreach counselors to make sure that any academic recovery was really targeted. And I think one of the things baked into ESSER, and I would love to talk to my colleagues about this through this panel, is we assume everybody's ready to use data. And so we release all these funds. And one of the things that I hear anecdotally from our district leaders and school leaders is feeling overwhelmed with how to make meaning of their data so that they can make the right investments with the money. So the influx of money is fantastic. One of the burdens that we've seen is just really making sure that they're looking at the right data points and they know which data to look at. And what does it mean to continually look at data to change programming or change instruction? So those are some of my observations. Tanya, I'm sure you have others to layer on to this.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. From the state agency, we get to see lots of programs in all the districts in the state of South Carolina, and they've been doing some real imaginative things. Some of them that Kimberly spoke on, she's doing there in her area as well, one being STEM and STEAM projects. They're putting lots of funding into those projects, providing more hands-on type activities for students, even working with organizations like the District Summer Learning Network to help them build more meaty summer programs and after school projects so that kids can really tie those lessons into what they're learning in the regular day, but in a more innovative type way. So we have lots of districts that are using those funds to increase their the thrust in their learning in after school and summer school. We've had districts to create entire Mac labs or computer labs where kids are learning how to code, how to build robots, how to operate drones, those things, and even get them certified in those areas. So as they leave high school, they have some certification they can take with them into their next level of education, or if they're going into the workforce. So we've seen a lot of work in those areas for STEAM and STEM and after school and summer school. Also, Kimberly mentioned on the including more interventionists in their curriculum in their day. Lots of districts have already had those folks in place, but not quite enough, right? They didn't have enough to meet the need of the students, especially when kids are coming back with that large learning loss that we've all seen because kids were out for what, a year and a half, working more remotely than in the brick and mortar building. So we see a huge number of interventionists that are coming in that are working with students to kind of really push them, not just those students that are on the lower tier, but that bubble student, right? The one that you can just push right on over. So we have lots of interventionists now that are coming in to work with those students as well as those gifted and talented kids, because we don't want them to lose, you know, what they have because so much is being thrust on those kids that are struggling. So, and what we've noticed as the state agency was a lot of those funds are being going to projects like STEAM, STEM, and those interventionists. And we have set aside special funding for students, for districts using after school and summer, as well as meeting that social emotional need of those students. We included lots of our plans have mental health components where we're getting more mental health workers into the school districts to work with those students and to work with those teachers as they try to recover from, you know, lots of those changes that they went through going through the pandemic.
And I will say the other thing is being able to use those funds to replace, enhance, or extend core curriculum, because you know you don't have the same supplement supplant that you do with the other federal funding. So that has been something that has been very beneficial to a lot of districts. I know we've done some of that, but there's a lot of districts around us that felt like maybe a curriculum that they had adopted previously was not really working for them, or, you know, we've moved to this whole science of reading, and so needing more resources and or more training. So being able to do that and not have to worry about a supplement supplant. Another thing that we've done is we have hired some social workers using a different resource, and then being able to expand on that and add a couple of more has been very helpful for us. And then just the resources to go along with to support the STEM activities and things like you have been mentioning. We've been able to do that as well by giving, you know, buildings some resources to go with that they haven't had before.
Thank you all very much. Some fantastic responses to the very first question. We're off to a great start. All right, let's move on to the next question here. What should districts consider doing when ESSER funds run out? What are states and districts doing to find alternate funding or alternative funding? And I'm going to start with Dr. Newland.
Thanks, Tim. So I would actually say it's not about thinking about what you're going to do when ESSER funds run out. It's what we need to be doing right now. And we're seeing trend both at the state level and district level. We need to be evaluating what we've invested in, because there will come a time when we have to make hard decisions. You know, I think generally, I was just at AASA, the National Superintendent's Conference back in February, and folks were talking about the fiscal cliff. Is it coming? And, you know, I think my thought on this generally is it's going to depend on where we are, right? It's going to depend on what states are going to invest and supplement, what communities are going to be ready to invest in, and the potential sources for revenue for our districts down the road. But currently, what everybody really needs to be thinking about is evaluation. One, to make sure we're maximizing our dollars, and I hate reducing it to maximizing dollars because we're talking about our kids and our staff, but there's this very real reality that money is not limitless for us, and we need to take a hard look at our budgets and best understand what it is that's working for our kids and why is it working, and what do we potentially scale back or keep in an individual school. I think in our work, there is this anxiety and hesitancy to talk about evaluation because unfortunately, more often than not, our communities think evaluation means you're cutting my programming versus really creating that culture. I mentioned data literacy, really creating a culture in your community. And it starts with school boards, and then it's district leadership teams down into classrooms, that looking at data is just a piece of what we do. We should be diagnostic in our work, right? I'm a trained reading specialist, so I think about the diagnostic teaching of reading. And I wish we could really get to a place in our field where everybody's really comfortable talking about the data. Not to say that the academic outcome and behavioral data is what we solely should be looking at, but we really need to take on mixed methods evaluations. I mentioned that LEAP program in Connecticut and some of the findings from the evaluation. That's really powerful. So if I can put on the board, here is where all of the investments were made. Here's where we're seeing changes in some of what are longer term outcomes. You know, that's something that we really need to face when we talk about academic recovery and we look at research internationally. So in Australia, when there were bushfires, because when COVID hit, we really had to get creative as researchers and look at what are the long-term effects of what's happening right now. And what it comes down to is this isn't a finite period of time. So I think there's advocacy that needs to happen at the state level and with professional organizations like yours. How do we advocate to our legislators that this is not a one and done situation? This is impact over time, and we need funding for that. But then also where we have greatest agency is that evaluation component. And so both formative and summative, what's working? Why isn't it working? Why is it working? Who is it working for? Because maybe I find that this investment worked really well for one school in my system, but it doesn't make sense for the other systems or the other schools in my system. That doesn't mean that we're doing away with the program. It's all about diagnosing. What do my kids need? When do they need it? Why do they need it? And what are the resources that we need to allocate? So I would really advocate and urge everyone, we really need to be looking at evaluation. I know Georgia's Department of Education partnered with Excellence in Education to examine the use of ESSER funds. I'm sure Kimberly and Tanya are going to talk about what they're seeing, but generally we're seeing this trend that to prepare means we need to be evaluating right now to understand how we can make the best choices with fewer resources in a year or two.
And I totally agree. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm totally agree with you, Dr. Newland. you cannot wait until the end, right? You need to start looking at your data now. One thing about these funds, these are COVID relief funds. They came out in the middle of the pandemic. So decisions were made on the dime, right? We moved really, really quickly to get computers in kids' hands, to get trained to teachers. We moved so rapidly, right? To keep the structure of the systems from falling. So now we have a kind of a time to slow it down a bit and look at what we've done. Look at what you purchased, look at what you bought, look at who you hired. What of those things have given you the most return on your buck, right? What is the most important? What has provided a substantial growth in your students or even in your professionals there in your buildings? So don't wait until COVID funds have run out. Say, oh my gosh, what we're going to do? Start looking now and say, hey, what has been successful? How can we kind of reallocate our local funds to sustain not all of these projects, but the most important projects, the projects that make the most advancement for our students, the projects that provide the most assistance to our teachers and our staff. So start looking at those things now. The supplant issue with ESSER was indeed something we've never seen in federal funds, but it has been a large help for a lot of these districts and able to move those monies around to get some of the things you really wanted or really needed, but keeping in mind those monies won't always be there. So those things will have to go back to your general funds and make sure you did not cripple yourself, right? By pulling too much from your general fund and depending on ESSER, and then your general fund cannot cover those costs that you moved out previously. So keep that in mind too. How is my general fund looking? How are my other accounts looking as ESSER runs out? Are these fundings still going to be here? And looking at those other fundings, all your title monies, how can you braid those together? How can we make this go the longest way? We encourage districts at all times, whenever you're braiding ESSER funds with any other funds, spend the ESSER funds first, right? ESSER funds have a deadline. There is no extension. There is no, we're going to get another year. It is done with, right? Come September 2024 for ARP and September 2023 for ESSER 2. It's a done deal. So whenever you can, we're encouraging our districts, spend those ESSER funds first, and then you use your other funds to sustain those projects that you think need to be continued in your district so that you can have continual success.
Yeah, and I would echo those, and then just really look at who all is involved with those different funding sources, because I know it's different in every district as to who oversees and provides guidance for those, and making sure that those people are at the table. I mean, for me, in my district, I pretty well work with all of those funds. So there's probably fewer people that have to sit down at a table, but I know that there are some districts where there's one person that does Title I, there's someone else that does Title II. And so you may need more people at the table, but really looking at all of your funding sources and how they might need to begin to change or shift in the work that's being done, and really looking at that now and what does that need to look like later. So based on how you're evaluating and what's working or not working, what is it that you need to continue to sustain, and what is that going to look like, and where is that going to need to be funded from? And in Arkansas, we have, we're fortunate enough that we have 4 state categorical funding sources that kind of mirror our federal funding. And so that helps us. And so we get to begin to look at, so is this something that we're gonna continue to fund in one of those funding sources, or is this something that we're gonna need our title schools to say, if that ASI was important enough for you, you need to consider that you're gonna keep that person there versus having expendable funds and those kinds of things. So those are the kind of conversations that we'll begin to have as we begin to make those plans. But now's the time to be looking at that, because it's going to pass very, very fast. And then just looking at other resources. I know that we are always looking for, is there a grant out there to do X, whatever X is. Safety has been a big issue that we've been working on lately. So we've received several grants that we're working on for that. And so just whatever it happens to be. And then always, like Tanya was saying, really look to expend your most restricted funds first, and then work your way back to your district in order to save that.
Thank you all very much. All right, the next question, which I'm going to pose to Tanya first, is what role, if any, have ESSER funds played in the teacher shortage?
Well, here in the state of South Carolina, we were in a teacher shortage way before COVID, right? We've been struggling to get teachers in the classrooms. But I think with the influx of all this funding, what has happened is teachers have actually left the classroom because we're hiring so many interventionists and all these other programs. We have seen a great deal of teachers leave the classroom for these interventionists, these more administrator type roles. So we have seen that happen with ESSER. But even though there has been a teacher shortage, I think these ESSER funds have also allowed school districts to make it more enticing for teachers to come, especially in these rural school districts where, you know, there's no movie theater, there's no grocery store, you know, there are no apartment. I mean, it's just a rural area. So with these ESSER funds, they've been able to give incentives to teachers to sign on. They've been able to provide retention bonuses, you know, trying to encourage teachers to stay in the classroom and to stay in those districts. So I always say, hey, don't blame the teacher shortage on ESSER. Those funds did not cause it, even though it did pull some teachers out of the classroom, because in the state of South Carolina, we've had this shortage for years. But I think districts are being very strategic in using that money to keep teachers in the classroom, to keep administrators in these rural districts, and to be able to be competitive in offering pay and incentives to teachers to come to their districts, as well as to remain in the classroom. So a lot of our districts are giving retention bonuses when teachers, or anyone from your custodial staff to your cafeteria workers to your school level administrations to your district level administration, giving sign-in bonuses if you agree to stay for another year or agree to stay for another 2 years, giving sign-in bonuses for those to come into the district. You know, if you are coming from out of town, you know, we'll give you this amount, you move in to this particular area and work here. So as much as ESSER has pulled some folks from the classroom, it is also encouraging folks to stay in the classroom by providing that monetary incentive.
I think that has probably varied across states and within states, because I know even within our state, there are districts that probably have used more of that for the retention piece, and others that have not in our conversations. But I would say that it has taken a lot of certified teachers off of the market, because just my ASI example of putting interventions in classroom in our northwest region of the state, there's probably 125 or so teachers that were able to be used for substitutes or available for jobs that are not in the market anymore. And so we've got some smaller districts around here that were having a really hard time getting someone to apply for a job, because they could come work in a larger district and then be ready perhaps to have a job in that larger district in the next year, because they would have worked there for a year. And so it has caused some difficulty. But I would say we've had almost a harder time with our classified folks in trying to fill some instructional assistant positions, because of all the other federal money that was out there to provide support for families. And then you've got all the little other companies that were paying higher. So, you know, a classified position doesn't always pay as much. So there were some places that people were leaving here to go work elsewhere because they could get more money, and it would be a year-round job. And so that's where we've had some difficulty with that.
Sorry, I had trouble picking myself off mute that time. So similar to what Tanya and Kimberly have shared, we've seen pretty significant investments in addressing substitute shortages, as well as some investments in increasing teacher salary, mentoring for early career teachers. So in South Dakota, we saw, I think it was called the Blue Ribbon Task Force, where they were focused on salaries, mentoring, alternative certification pathways, development of paraprofessionals. Rhode Island, I know they were also trying to provide training to paraprofessionals and forming partnerships with institutes of higher education to kind of set up grow your own programming. So those are a few examples that immediately come to mind, just to extend what Kimberly and Tanya have already shared.
And I think we can kind of jump to our chat here because that does, Veronica did have that question. She said, are you aware of programming supported through ESSER funding that involve the support of university teacher cadets, connecting working with school systems, grow your own teacher cadet programs, et cetera? She works at Purdue University and wants to know if there's funding that would match that.
Here in South Carolina, we are working with the National Center for Grow Your Own. We are using semester funds as well as our state innovation funds to provide awards to colleges to grow your own teachers in your own areas. If you have paraprofessionals in your school district that would like to be teachers, they can go through this program to receive more degrees and become certified to teach. So we're trying to work with some of our more rural areas in that place as well. So we are sending some funds to the Grow Your Own program here in the state of South Carolina. We're also working with looking at some districts are wanting to begin their teacher cadet program and how that could work to get more students interested in the field of education before they're going to college. So we have seen some programs in districts where they are bringing back some teacher cadet teachers because previously they had to let that particular program go. So they're setting that program up to get it started. They're using the ESSER funds as seed money to get that going there. So here in the state, we are looking at both teacher cadet programs and the Grow Your Own programs on the college level to get teachers back into the classrooms.
Yeah, so we have not been using ESSER funds for classified folks to as a Grow Your Own program. We do have a Grow Your Own program in connection with our University of Arkansas here. We've had a program with them for several years. It's called REACH, and we've had I don't know how many folks that have graduated from that program and actually come to work within our district. We have used some funding, and it's not been ESSER, but to actually hire some of our high school students whose schedule allowed for that. In other words, they weren't missing any classes and they had their credits, and they have passed the parapro and a background check to come in and do some tutoring for our younger students. That's something that we just started this year, again, as a result of not having been able to find folks to fill positions that were open. And so that's something that we investigated and were able to do. And so we're real excited about that. They were not limited to folks that were in our student educator program, but we do have students in year 1, 2, and 3 of that program, and we are looking at ways to increase and advertise and recruit into that program so that we can get more folks into that.
Great. And Veronica, I had another question. She's interested to know more about some of the specific successful programs that you guys have used to reverse learning loss.
We have seen some success again with the interventionist because just able to have more of them on staff than normally, and to not just target those students who are struggling, but to look also at the entire school and work with the kids that are on the bubble that can, just need that extra push over, and work with those GT students as well. So we have seen a lot of success and received some data in our visits with school districts to show where they have, because of the increased number of interventionists, or the more, because they have more time to be more targeted and more, working with students' particular struggles, that they are seeing some more growth in students than they've seen in the past. So we've been very excited about that. Again, that is something they'll have to start addressing now, because we don't want to see that kind of growth and then the money goes away and all those folks are no longer in the districts, right? So they're all right now thinking of ways to sustain those type of programs, because ESSER funds a lot of people. A lot of people are funding through ESSER. So and that people, that manpower, right, is very essential in a school building. So even though that's been a very successful thing, it's a very costly thing as well. So districts are considering now, what ways can we sustain these? What programs that may not be working, we can reallocate funds to maintain these interventions in our school district. So that's been one of the most, one of the things that come up in lots of our discussions with the school, with different districts, is that, yes, we're so glad we have these highly qualified folks coming in to work more specifically with those students who need that targeted assistance. That and STEM, kids they like get their hands dirty. They want to build, they want to play on the computers, they want to make the drones, they want to make the robots. We have had some very beautiful labs are set up. Teachers are getting trained. They're using the train the trainer method. One teacher get training in how to do this coding procedure. So now this teacher has an incentive to stay. They've got maybe a sign-in bonus. So they'll stay on and they'll continue to train more teachers as more teachers come into that particular program. So they're using that as a way to sustain those successful programs. So adding those a little bit more intense curriculum options to a schedule is very good for students, and they come to school just to go to those particular classes, right? They come every day because they want to go to the STEM class. They want to play with the 3D printer. They want to, build small robots and fly the drones. So those have also been very exciting things that we've seen happen here in South Carolina.
Yeah, and I would echo the specialist in the classroom, and then the training piece. Like I said, moving to the professional learning. I mean, we're working towards being a professional learning district because we're working across the board, and that training has allowed our folks to be able to be very focused and really looking at our RTI process and honing in on that and being able to provide very focused support for our students. And so that has really helped with the conversation and keeping it on the instruction and on what the students need. And it's changing what's happening in our buildings.
And I would just reinforce what Kimberly and Tanya have shared and lift up the two key pieces around engaging our students in their learning. So when we talk about STEAM and STEM, at that core, we go in and we see lessons where the students are actively engaged in their learning. And so what does the research tell us? The research tells us that skill and drill, the traditional remediation doesn't work, right? So we need to make sure that whatever we're investing in, I think about John Hattie's work and some of his assertions around learning loss, right? And so how do we make sure that we're approaching this not as this is this deficit in our kiddos and we have to fill a gap, but rather as what does good instruction look like and what does the research tell us, right? And so the research tells us that it's really that just-in-time support that helps our kids. So how do we invest in programming, curriculum that's going to engage them, and how do we train? So the other piece that I want to lift up out of what Kimberly and Tanya noted was that professional learning. So when we saw Tennessee invest in a tutoring core, and we saw Arkansas make some investments in summer enrichment and extended day, professional learning was what they came back to. So how do we make sure our teachers understand how to meet our kids where they are? So coming back to that diagnostic instruction. So what is it that they need and how are we going to get them there? And that's where we've really seen innovation, because it isn't necessarily one size fits all, but having a system and having district leaders who know how to make meaning of the data, understand where kids are, because everybody has had a different experience over the past few years. And then how do we put the supports and practices in place that's going to continue that along their learning journey?
Well, and focusing on essential standards, looking at standards and focusing on essential standards and defining what that is and coming up with proficiency scales. I mean, that's getting teachers really deep into the work and getting them to understand what that is, which then is going to, help them to be much better at their work and certainly know more what it's going to take for a student, and therefore obviously be able to provide more focused instruction for them when they're needing that extra support. So it's like I said, it's changing the work that's being done.
And kind of on another note, I meant to mention this earlier about sustainability of programs. One thing that some of our districts are doing from our state level funding from the ARP ESSER, we did provide additional funds to school districts to hire mental health counselors. And these are counselors that would then work for the school district, right? And they would bill Medicaid. So as they bill Medicaid for that first year where ESSER paid their salary, the billing of Medicaid would then provide funding. So when the ESSER funding ends, they will have a pool of money there to continue to pay those salaries. So that's just one thing. We have about 25, 27 districts in the state that are doing that. And they're going to use that Medicaid funding as a way to continue funding that mental health counselor in their district when the ESSER funds go out. So that's a very innovative way, you know, to maintain the same level of service. They won't have to cut back or change it. As long as you're billing and bringing in those additional funds, you're creating your own pot of money to sustain your program once those ESSER funds are over. So if you do have mental health counselors in your school districts, that may be an option for you as well. If the council works for the district and not for another agency, because if they work for another agency, those billings go back to that agency, right? But they need to be someone hired by your district. And then those billing funds will come back to you. That is one way to sustain your mental health portion of your ESSER programs if you have those running in your district.
Yeah, we do that, and it is certainly an undertaking.
Yeah, Medicaid in itself is an undertaking, so yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we have any other audience questions at the moment. So we'll start the process of wrapping up, but I'd love to, I know you guys did a lot of preparation for this discussion. I really appreciate it. And so I want to give each of you an opportunity to share any other thoughts, any final thoughts about ESSER and ESSER funds that you maybe didn't have an opportunity to share up to this point. Kimberly, why don't I start with you?
Well, again, I just think really making sure that you're where you need to be. If you haven't spent your learning loss portion, making sure that you're double checking that you're on target to be doing that, especially if you've got that tied up in salaries, because that final obligation period, you're not going to be able to do salaries during that time frame because, if they're employees anyway, because that September 30th would be your last day to obligate a salary, because your obligation period for federal funds is different depending on what it is that you're obligating. And a salary for an employee obligates the day that they work. So you're not going to be able to go all the way to December. So making sure that you know the rules that's going to govern what it is that you're trying to obligate. Same thing with travel. It occurs the day the travel occurs. So those kinds of things, just making sure that you're working with people that know what those federal rules are, so that as you're trying to plan how this is wrapping up, that you're able to make sure that you're getting things in the right place. And if you're needing to do some adjustments or moving things around, that you're doing that now. And that you're also looking at that long-term planning for what happens when this money is gone. And have we been using ESSER to sustain the district because of other issues? And is there something in the district that really is going to need to be funded federally later? If that's the case, you need to be really looking at, is that something that needs to be going into ESSER now? If it's appropriate, obviously it would have to fit within that funding source, because you can't just go from a federal fund from a district fund to a federal fund. But if it is something that could move into ESSER now, it could move out of ESSER into a federal fund the following year, but it can't go from your district straight to one of your regular federal funds. But because ESSER doesn't have that supplement supplant, then you would be able to do that. So really that big picture, that longer term planning, and looking at everything that you have in place. So it's not really just oh my gosh, ESSER's going to go away. It is oh my gosh, we've got all of these things that we need to consider, and we need to look at all of it now while we're trying to make those decisions.
Awesome. Great insight. Layla?
Yeah, so I think to take Kimberly's point, we need to be looking at our data. I feel like I might be a broken record in this session, but I think it's really important that folks walk away thinking about, do we know what we should be looking at right now? And are we prepared to act on what we see in the data? I think that's where we see districts struggle, right, Kimberly? So you're immersed in the work, and sometimes it can be hard to pull yourself out of it. And I think that at times we take for granted our school level readiness for leveraging data and making decisions with data. And so I would just say one takeaway, and what I would encourage folks is when they walk away from this, thinking about what is our internal capacity for evaluating what we're doing. And if it's not there, there are lots of resources online that you can find that can guide you through how to build a theory of change, that can guide you through how do we make sure that our staff are data literate. And I think that's really what I'm circling around, that as we have to make harder budget decisions, we need everybody in the system rowing in the same direction. And a piece of that is understanding data and being willing to look at what the trend lines show us, look at what the survey data tells us. Maybe my professional learning wasn't that great and I spent a ton of money on programming, but I didn't get my teachers the learning that they needed. But it's true. I mean, we see this day in and day out. And so the sooner you can ask yourself those questions, the easier it is when you're navigating in a really challenging budget climate. And we know that's coming. There are lots of factors outside of ESSER funds, declining enrollment, the recession that we're not talking about. So it isn't a recession. So that would just be my key takeaway, regardless of whether it's ESSER funds or other budget factors that are coming down the road for us. We just need to make sure our systems know how to use the data and make sound decisions grounded in data.
And we have to be willing to let go of some things just because it's how we've always done it. And because you like having the extra people or whatever, it doesn't mean that that's what we need to continue to do. And so I've had this conversation here. We literally have administrators that came on the year that we went to COVID, but also that they became an administrator in a Title I funded school. They also get categorical funding from us. And then they got all of this ESSER money. So they do not know how to live without all of that. And pretty soon it's going to get pretty scary pretty quick, because they're going, they've had an abundance and then it's going to fall pretty quickly. And so it's those kind of conversations that are going to have to be had pretty quickly.
Well, it's the protocol.
Absolutely.
Tanya, I would really love to hear from you. What are the protocols that you put into place? Because to Kimberly's point, we haven't even touched on leadership burnout, right? We've been focused on staff and students in this discussion, but the other piece is, how do you maintain system capacity around some of the issues that we've talked about and investments that we want to see over the long term when we know that there's leadership churn? Because as an evaluator, there's nothing like walking into a room and asking folks, what was the original intention of this program? And everybody's looking at each other and they're like,
Nobody knows.
I wasn't here when we bought it. And
Right.
we don't even know our why.
Yeah, that's the issue. Again, in the state of South Carolina, we had even before COVID, right, was this large turnover in administration. It's feast or famine, right? We had all this money, then we're going to not have any at all. So it's really a struggle to find that fine line to balance it all. And it takes good leadership to do that, to recognize that we've had some districts that say, we don't want another dime. There is no way. We can't buy another thing. We don't want any more paper, any more computers. So we have that as well. Folks that have way more money than they could ever try to spend. They don't have the capacity to do it. So we have lots of programs now where one of our state agencies are working with our leaders to kind of provide them with support, right? To show them what we try to do in my office with the ESSER funds is connect school districts with other school districts. Because, as an agency, we're support, right? We don't provide all those types of things. We try to make sure we have the support mechanisms in place for those school districts. So we see districts with leadership that are doing great things, right? They are supporting their leadership there. We see some longevity there, some some innovative things are happening in the school districts, we try to put them with other school districts that may be struggling a bit. Because we get to see all of them from where we sit. We do program, not just fiscal monitoring, but we do programmatic monitoring for our ESSER programs here in the state. So we were able to kind of put those folks together programmatically. These are successful schools where things are happening for those schools that may be struggling in those areas. And right now what we're doing as from our office is, because in our office, we manage all ESSER funds and all EASE funds. That's all we do here in Office of Emergency Programs. We call it our aggravation phase, where we're going to start aggravating these school districts, where every month you get an email that says, hey, spend your money. So what I'm going to tell you now is you have ESSER 2 money, spend your money, look at what you have in ESSER 2 that, or in ARP, or what some call ESSER 3, that can be charged back to ESSER 2 to kind of get those funds out. We did a great job as a state. We sent back less than 1% of ESSER funds in the first round, or when it closed out on last year. We're very proud of that because we had that period of aggravation, right? Where we just kind of stayed on those school districts to get the money spent. So I would recommend you do that. And also not just programmatic monitoring, but that fiscal monitoring. The question or the statement is not if we're monitored, it is when we are monitored. So time and effort, if you are paying multiple people from multiple pots of money, have those time and efforts. If you're paid 100% from ESSER, have that blank certification paperwork. All that is one of the biggest things we found. I mean, our school districts and our fiscal auditing is they're not maintaining their time and effort. So make sure you do that there's a clear deviation of funding, what's ESSER is paying for, what Title I is paying for, that you have systems to track that, and that everything I tell my district all the time, if you wrote it down on a Post-it note, right, put it in a file. We want to make sure that when the feds come in and audit our state, and we have to push that audit down to school districts or state partners, or even our nonprofit organizations we're working with, that we all can sustain those fiscal and programmatic audits. So make sure you get with your state agency who's monitoring those funds to make sure you have all of your I's dotted and all your T's crossed, because the nation is watching these fundings and they are waiting to see what we did with it. So it is unfortunate, I think, that they may think come October 1, 2024, everybody's going to be an advanced student, right? Because they had millions and millions of dollars of ESSER funds. But that we all know as educators, that's not how it works. We won't see the growth in these kids probably for 2 or 3 years down the road, right? It won't be an overnight thing. So keeping that in mind when you consider what you need to keep in your district, what's going to continue to have you on that success path, what's going to continue to show that growth as you look at your data and your evaluation, what is continually pushing you guys in the right direction, so that few years down the road, when all the ESSER dries up and all the hoopla goes away, you can say we're still moving, we're still going, we're still moving in a good way, and ESSER helped us, right, to create a path that's going to put our students on for continual success. So those are kind of the things we're telling our school districts right now in this period of aggravation, is what we call it, from here through September of 2023, to get those ESSER 2 funds spent. So let's make sure you guys get that out of the way. If you're blending funds, use your ESSER funds first, right? Because those funds come with very hard deadlines, very hard deadlines.
Oh, I feel like we should have pulled the structure out sooner. The last 25 minutes was pretty awesome, guys. So thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but we probably should wrap up here. I really appreciate, I'm going to stop share so everybody can see your lovely faces. And I just want to thank you all so very much for joining us today for this conversation. I want to thank Alicia for pulling this group of people together, subject matter experts, amazing panelists, all of you. And thank you, Alicia, for co-hosting with me. And yeah, so thanks everybody for attending this or watching a recording of this AAEE webinar. And we hope you'll check out our future events in the future. How about that? Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.